business, improve profitability, and so on. Today I'm going to share with you how you can prepare your business for any disaster, big or small, act of man or act of God, and minimize the impact of an outage for your customers and for your staff. But what I'm really excited about is to give you technology ideas you can start implementing today. It can help you sleep better at night, knowing that your business will continue to function regardless of employee error or outside events. Now, I know that you're likely on this webinar for one of two reasons. Either one, you have a backup and a business continuity plan in your organization, and you're just looking for a better way to keep yourself protected. Or number two, you're just winging it. You have your important company files kind of scattered throughout a digital landscape, and you're just hoping that when disaster strikes, you'll be able to piece together the fragments of your digital records and stay in business. Now, if you're in the latter camp, then know that you're not alone. Take good notes today. Many of the points that we will be talking about will ultimately help you get back on track. Let's start with a story here. Let's go to the next slide here. Now, how many of you have heard of the movie Toy Story 2? I know I have. Kids have watched it countless times. Now, how many of you know, though, that this movie almost didn't happen? One day, while all the programmers and animators were hard at work, they were watching their precious work suddenly start to disappear. First, it was Woody's hat, then his boots, and then Woody, and then all the characters, then Al's toy barn, and then the whole movie just started disappearing. And the project lead quickly called the IT department. They pulled the plug out of the Toy Story 2 movie server. They pulled the plug and quickly checked to see how much damage had been done, and sure enough, most of the movie was gone. Well, the director also thought, we have a backup. We have a backup of this movie, all this work, and if that backup was bad, we'd lose over a year's worth of work. That's 30 people working 24 hours a day. That's how much work they would have lost. So sure enough, they brought their backups in, they fired them up, and lo and behold, no one had been watching the backups. So the backups were dead, they were useless, and so they almost had a heart attack. But what they also didn't know is secretly the project lead, because she was a new mom, had taken regular copies of the movie home so she could review the work and still see her kids at the same time. So quickly they rushed over to her home, they packed up her computer and carefully drove it back to their offices. And sure enough, the Pixar employees fired up her computer and there was the movie. And so that's why you can watch Toy Story 2 today. Now, there's actually a real quick short film that I'm going to give you the link for at the end of this presentation. It's called The Movie Vanishes, and it's very fun, so I encourage you to check it out at the end. I'll give you the link at the end of the presentation. Now, do you think this happens a lot? I'll tell you this, based on our experience, sure does. Most people associate disaster preparedness with events related to, major storms, climate change, that kind of thing. But according to ITM Web, they did an intensive study on Katrina and the businesses that were affected by it and who survived and how. 3 out of 4 companies did not make it beyond the 1-year mark after the storm hit. And of those that did, 1/3 of those lost critical applications and data. These studies show that businesses don't prioritize protection. So there's this ill-conceived perception that technology is expensive and data breaches and outages, they don't occur that often. But, if you just Google the headlines, just recently we had major data breaches at Target and Home Depot, and storms like Katrina are happening more and more often. The fact is that human error is behind around 41% of these system disasters. So something as simple as a techie running the wrong script as they did in the Toy Story 2 example, that could have serious implications. So, if you're a company, you have backup systems in place, be sure that you're testing them. Many are not. And, once you do put a backup and data recovery system in place, it does need to be tested regularly, and very few companies are following through on this principle. When you run these drills with your disaster recovery plans, you got to go back and fix the problems identified during these assessments. You must get better at your disaster recovery. So, now I don't want to, downplay the effect of climate change. I've put just 3 slides up on here. Iniki in '92, Katrina in '05, and Japan in 2011. And, just look at this list. I got to be honest, in looking for these images just for this presentation, to find pictures of the Japan disaster, that was tough. There's a lot of really scary stuff out there on the internet that show these disasters in detail, and we're likely to see more of this in the future. So I guess my point is that while humans account for 41% of system disasters, Mother Nature is taking care of the remaining 59%, and it's likely to get worse in our lifetime. Let's start with a quote Benjamin Franklin said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." My goal for you is to give you less stress. It's to keep you in business when disaster strikes, be it from man or Mother Nature. Now let me ask you 3 quick questions. Number 1, how many of you have a written business continuity plan? This should outline how your organization will continue to operate in the event of specific disasters. What that means is there are different types of disasters, and you have a plan on how to address each of them. Number 2, go through and regularly rehearse and learn from this plan and get better over time. Third question for you. Do you have a contingency plan that allows you to stay in business when your vendors or customers are affected by a disaster? It's important to note that a business is not a mountain. It depends heavily on vendors, or should I say every organization depends heavily on vendors. It depends heavily on their customers to be able to function so that they function themselves. You don't need me to tell you this. You probably already know this running your organization. Your neighbors next door, your vendors, if they cannot operate, you cannot operate. So have a plan if you lose that channel. So today we're going to cover a few topics. Primarily, we're going to start with the 6 key questions you need to ask yourself as a company to ensure business continuity in the event of a disaster. This is something that I recommend you take notes on, but of course, a copy of this presentation will be available at the end. But I encourage you to go through these questions with your staff and really ponder them and find the best fit. We're going to go through some case studies and stories, some of our clients that we've changed some things with so that they are better prepared in the event of a disaster and can continue to function when things happen. And then there is a 12-point disaster recovery checklist that can prepare your business for anything, man-made or act of God. And of course, at the end, if we do have time, I'd like to go through some answers. We'll go through some questions that come up during the presentation and answers to them. As an added bonus, hang on until the end, and you'll get a free disaster recovery preparation checklist. It's going to be free for all participants, and I'll give you the URL at the end. Now, before we get rolling, I know that there are some of you here today that I haven't met. So for these folks, let me briefly introduce myself. I am a veteran IT specialist. I partner up with businesses. We figure out technology solutions to improve efficiency and anything that's related to peace of mind, be that disaster recovery, backup, business continuity, or just streamlining things, finding new tech, cloud, mobility, all these things that every business organization has a need for but may not know where to turn. And been working with Hawaii businesses since 2006, and as Ronaldin mentioned, I did launch Best Buy's Geek Squad Business Technology Division here on Oahu. I've had a regular spot on the KHNL Morning Show and a host for Think Tech Studios TV show. And of course, I'm really proud of our 100% client success rate. What that means is that whatever we do for a customer helps improve their business. And one of my missions in life is to help people with technology. That helps me fulfill my goals, and I'm glad to do it for the community. Sun Tzu said, "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles without disaster." Let me ask you, are you a proactive person? I should hope so. So let's start by going through some scenarios that can keep your business afloat through 100 battles, that can keep you proactive in the face of the inevitable. Have you ever experienced one of these scenarios? I know I have. Extended power outages greater than 2 days. We have those pretty often here, actually, in Hawaii. Water submersion. That doesn't necessarily mean a big hurricane or a typhoon. A lot of that can be leaky pipe, busted pipe a few floors up from you can leak down through many floors in a building in a matter of hours. Have you ever had equipment damage due to electrical surges? Now, we have clients that say, we're okay. We have photovoltaic on the top of our building. We're okay. Well, just a few days ago, I talked with a client whose photovoltaic grid got completely fried due to an electrical surge. So, it does happen. Now, I'm no expert in electricity, and I'm not a physicist, but I can tell you that we do get calls pretty regularly about changes in the electrical patterns on Oahu, and being prepared for them helps you relatively inexpensively stay up and running. Software damage due to hostile ransomware. There's something called CryptoLocker. If you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to Google that word. CryptoLocker and CryptoWall is a pretty significant threat that's been, it probably came to the market about 2 years ago, where if you open up an email, click on an attachment, accidentally run the program, it encrypts your computer and every computer that it's connected to on your work network. What that means is that when everything is encrypted, essentially there's a password to unlock or decrypt all of your files. In order for you to get that password, you have to pay a ransom. That ransom can be anywhere from what I've seen, $1,500 to over $100,000, depending on who wants to be, or how greedy the person who's holding the ransom is. Recently, it was rumored that a CryptoLocker account was seized overseas, as it was receiving over $1 million a day in ransoms. So, CryptoLocker is a very serious thing. So, having a good backup is pretty important. Namely because it's going to keep you from losing your files when things like that do happen, which inevitably they will, and we're seeing more and more types of ransomware show up on the market. Of course, there's the typical viruses, trojans, and malware. Those things usually serve to slow down systems, replicate themselves, and just in general cause havoc. Being protected against these things can not only affect your productivity, but can keep you up and running and prevent data breaches from occurring on your network. Lastly, we do see quite a number of break-ins, theft, or vandalism. Sometimes it's from disgruntled employees, but oftentimes it's near the end of the year, when times are tough and it's winter time and people are frustrated. They'll go to, the extreme to get it through the holidays. and unfortunately, you can be a victim of that. Luckily, you have some time to prepare. We're not even in the springtime yet, so give yourself a few months, and you'll start seeing those kind of stories pop up on the news. So now that we have some of these scenarios on the top of mind, let's start by answering the question, what is needed to reconstruct the business when something like this happens? I've identified 6 things that you can start with. The first thing are files. Now files, it may seem kind of obvious, but there seems to be this entropy of files, kind of like an explosion of files occurring in organizations' networks. There's some marketing materials here, there's some important correspondence there, and really doing something called a software roundup or a data roundup is a good place to start. Get all your files together for every one of your systems and put it all into one place that's easy to see, understand, and by extension, back up and restore in the event of a failure. Files come in all file types and formats, but the most common, of course, are Word, Excel, PowerPoint documents, such as this one, bookmarks, and PDFs, so anything that you may have scanned in your organization. And of course, this could also include your Outlook data file if you still use Outlook and depending on how it's set up. My tech tip for you on how to address this issue is to look at cloud storage providers. Of course, so we do see Dropbox, Google Drive, SkyDrive. A lot of people use this. However, just be aware that private data should not be in the cloud. Private data means social security numbers. Private data means bank account information. So be sure that this stuff does not end up in a cloud service provider. Dropbox, for example, has been hacked 5 times in the past 2 years. And also, depending on the amount of data that you have, which some clients have legitimately digitized their office, scanned all of their documents, those files, if they are compromised, can be very bad. But in addition, it's very costly to store, hundreds of gigs, if not terabytes of data in the cloud. And naturally, if you need that kind of information for day-to-day use, it can be very slow to get each of those files every single time you need to access them to stay in business day-to-day. Second thing you need to reconstruct the business, important vendors and passwords. Now, everything is online. Your bank account, insurance information, payroll, you name it. These usernames and passwords are sometimes stored on Post-its. That's a bad idea. These usernames and passwords are sometimes stored in Excel files. Also a bad idea. So, in addition to storing usernames and passwords somewhere, you should probably also keep the account information, phone numbers, any key vendors you need to stay in business. These could be your security company, your IT company, such as ours. Utility companies, right? You need to keep the lights on. Phone, internet service providers, insurance, blah, blah, blah. All this stuff should be stored somewhere securely. And a digital and paper format is recommended. A tech tip for you on how to best store important vendors' information and passwords is a free program called KeePass. It's an open source piece of software. It can securely store this information in a small encrypted file. The only caveat I have to using this piece of software is that there's a password on your file. If you lose that password, it's gone. There's no way that that file can be recovered. The good news is, however, it's very easy to print out the contents of these files. We use it every day. They're safe enough even to email around, and it's made by IT people for IT people, so it's relatively secure, and it's, at the end of the day, it's kind of a pretty piece of software in my opinion. So it's a good piece of software, doesn't cost you anything, and you can start using it today to keep an inventory of your vendors and account information. Item number 3 you need to reconstruct your business, installation media. If you've bought software, guess what? If your computers are destroyed or lost or damaged, you'll need to reinstall it. And if you need to find it in the bottom of a box in the back of a closet and it takes you 3 days to find it, that's 3 days of lost productivity. So putting it all in one place with your installation CDs, license keys, sometimes those license keys come out in your email, print it out, put it with the CD or DVD. Many times this software can also be digitally downloaded, so it's a digital purchase. Now, often when you do that, you still need that installation program that you downloaded. And if that's lost or it's scattered in the middle of, 10 terabytes of data, you'll never find it. It's like finding a needle in a haystack. So if you like, you can burn that file to a disk and put it in there with the rest of your software, or at least put it in a safe place where you're not going to misplace it. I always like to create a folder called disks. Then in that disks folder, in the shared folder for the organization, are all the disks and license keys and everything that they need to reconstruct any system. And it's a simple way to put it, a simple place to put everything. Now the good news is, here's my tech tip number 1. If you did purchase the software or any piece of software from Amazon, even later on after you've thrown out your software or lost it or can't find it, you can go back into Amazon, download that program again, download the license key, and you're back in business. Of course, I'm going to reemphasize throwing it out. If one of my clients is listening, they know who they are. Try not to throw out your software. It's pretty important. Also, your older software, if you've purchased an upgrade, you still need the original older software disk before you can upgrade the program. So before you go through there and throw that pile of CDs and DVDs into the trash of old software, be sure you didn't purchase an upgrade that also requires the original older version first in order to upgrade it to the new version. I'm pretty sure Adobe CS, the Creative Suite, works like this. So just double check, just to be safe. Item number 4 is network documentation. You'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner I put some dogs. Documentation, it's a fun play on words. It's a way to remember that you need to document everything you have. So I personally like to avoid spending hours and hours with vendors trying to figure out equipment configuration and network documentation and all this other stuff. Surrounding all that documentation into one place is really important. Typically what we do is we have a bright red folder at every one of our clients, and that's where all the documentation goes. I encourage you to do the same. Go down to your local office supply store, whichever one is, of course, a member of the Better Business Bureau, and pick up a brightly colored folder and put all of your network documentation there. You'll need your makes, models, serial numbers, and location of all the equipment in your network. That's very useful not just for insurance purposes, but it's helpful for technicians when they come in to service your equipment. Now, if you do want to get fancy and make pretty pictures, there's a tool. This is my tech tip for you. There's a tool called Microsoft Visio. It's not a cheap program, but you may find it useful for other applications. It allows you to create nice, pretty network diagrams where everything is, and layouts and point arrows between things. It's pretty cool. If you don't want to go out and spend the money for such a product, Google recently introduced drawings as part of Google Drive. It used to be a standalone product, and now they've integrated it in with Google Drive, and essentially allows you to create little drawings that can be stored in the cloud, and you can print them out and put them in your binder. Pretty cool. Item number 5, and what is needed to reconstruct the business, is your line of business app. Now, a line of business, or an LOB app, is anything that's specific to your industry that's needed for you to survive. There's usually some sort of customer database, a CRM. There's usually some sort of point of sale software. There could be some scheduling software, maybe some billing software, maybe some time clock software, etc. Now, some of the ones that everyone kind of seems to know is Intuit, and then once organizations reach a size where QuickBooks is no longer appropriate, they typically migrate over to Sage. Sage is very industry specific. Applications such as Timberline and Medware. These applications are meant to combine accounting with specific vertical needs. However, some of those programs still do require a database. Sometimes they require a server. They require workstation installation media, so other workstations on the network will still need to have their software reinstalled if they're damaged or lost. So having that installation program, having a firmly documented way of how to get your system back online, if everything were to go, it's really important. My tech tip for you, however, with line of business apps is that there's this growing trend, I would say in the past year and a half, 2 years, where these software vendors are moving to cloud-based subscription models for their products. So QuickBooks, you used to be able to just go down to Costco and get yourself a copy. That's great, but they're really pushing the QuickBooks Online, where for a monthly fee you have a web-based access to their software, and it's really useful for having different departments do things. Accounts receivable is different than accounts payable, and they can both be working on your QuickBooks data online without interruption, without interrupting each other. So I know Sage is also going this way with some of their products. I encourage you to look at that. Get in touch with your line of business app provider. See if you can move your stuff into the cloud so that you're better prepared in the event of a disaster. Lastly, number 6 in my list of recommended items you need to reconstruct the business are your physical files. Now, after a fire, for example, it's usually the water damage that really people tend to notice. You can have a small fire and the amount of water that comes in is unreal, and it can completely damage everything. So obviously we've gone through how to protect your critical systems such as your computers and your servers, but every business seems to need some amount of paper. Somewhere they keep something. And identifying which paper files, documents are required for ongoing operation is really important. Seeing if you can take some of those items and scan them and archive them is pretty important. So figure out a way to do that. There's several ways. So one of the things that we've worked with clients with is that they like to scan all that stuff, secure it off-site, and also have a hard copy that's also off-site. So they have something like a first aid kit off-site. We'll talk a little bit about that later, but having a nice little first aid kit for your business that has all your important files and documentation information could be pretty useful. My tech tip for physical files, there's something called microfilm. I'm sure you've heard of it. Maybe you remember it in school. Could have driven you crazy. It was down there at the library, and you had to look through this film, this piece of tape. I have a little picture of it here. Put it underneath a giant machine that looked like it was a garbage truck. And on the big screen you would see your documents. Now the funny thing is that there's this growing trend in taking paper files, digitizing them into PDFs, which everyone can get on board with, but then they also keep a copy in microfilm. And microfilm is really funny. It's old technology, but it's actually rated to last up to 100 years, and that's longer than any other data storage format currently available. Other than stone tablets, but I don't think you want to store your important company data in that. So what companies are doing now is scanning it both in digital and microfilm and putting it offsite somewhere safe. So let's summarize on the 6 points that are needed to reconstruct your business. Number 1 are your data files. Number 2, important vendors and passwords. Number 3, installation media, whether that's CDs or downloaded. Number 4 is your network documentation. Number 5 is your line of business apps. And number 6, those are your physical files. Let me give you a few more points to ponder. And this is actually pretty important. So think about this. Where is your backup data stored? And what's the medium? Stored on CD? Get with it. There's other file formats available that are much better. Is it in the cloud? Is it off-site? Is it stored locally? Is it backed up to a drive that's connected to the server, which if a fire or water or any other event were to hit, both would be lost? Also ask yourself, who's the point of accountability? Is there someone in your office who's responsible for checking the backups on a day-to-day basis, making sure that they went through? Is it an individual or is it a company? We have to do this daily for our customers. We go through the logs, make sure that their backups went through every day. It's like taking out the trash. You got to do it. And what is the business continuity or recovery process? So BC, I'm going to use the word BC quite a bit throughout this presentation, but the BC or recovery process is putting together procedures that keep you guys up and running in the event of minor outages. So for example, power goes out, phone system's down. If you're using a voice over IP phone system, which is kind of the growing trend and the direction that everything is going, then you can have your phone calls forwarded to cell phones. Pretty neat stuff. So that way you don't miss inbound phone calls and customer interactions just because there's a small power outage for 20 minutes. Small things add up. In terms of your backups, how often do you guys test them? How long does it take to recover the data that is being backed up? Many times we walk into situations where there are not true backups being made. So files get synchronized back and forth. So for example, they'll have an external drive plugged into their server and they'll run a script and it'll synchronize anything that's changed from yesterday to today. But the problem is that if ransomware pops into that network, which is the thing I mentioned earlier, the crypto locker, whereby the files inside of the network are encrypted and a key is required to unlock it, which you'll have to pay thousands of dollars for. Those encrypted files then get copied over from the server to the backup, and you're out of luck. You got to pay the ransom. It's also important to note that many times a file gets accidentally deleted. This comes back to the Toy Story issue. However, with the Toy Story story that I gave you at the beginning of the presentation, it's pretty obvious, right? The whole movie was erased. But that usually doesn't happen. What usually happens is someone erases a file, and it takes like a few weeks before they figure it out. They say, oh, wait a minute, where's that presentation I was working on for the Better Business Bureau? Where is that Excel file with all of our financials? I haven't looked at it in 2 weeks, but it seems to be missing. Well, if your backup only goes back a week, that file's gone. So think about really how long you keep your backups. Storage is cheap, so having backups that last a long time is probably in your best interest. And of course, I mentioned this point earlier. This is my last point in this Points to Ponder. Is looking at major natural disasters. Your customers and vendors may depend on you to get them back on track. So what that means is if there's a chemical spill, it can affect you and your neighbors. You guys both may need to evacuate, not have access to your computer systems. Also seen that happen. So just be aware that there are scenarios where your neighbors and clients and vendors may depend on you to get back in business. Of course, the best way to learn is to see what others have done. And so I picked two of our lovely clients. We love them very much, Seco and Lemery Tuxedos. Seco, of course, is a local nonprofit. Lemery Tuxedos is a local retailer. And Special Education Centers of Hawaii, they help an underserved population of challenged individuals. They provide adult daycare and are very valuable to the community in what they do. One of their challenges was that they had frequent equipment damage due to electrical surges. They have many sites with lots of computers and lots of things for their clients, and when a surge hits, all that fries. So the easy fix was to put in battery backups. But in addition, they had a line of business app that they used to service their clients better. That line of business app was running on a server, and it was antiquated and needed some upgrading. So they got in touch with their line of business provider, and as I recommended to you earlier, they inquired if a cloud subscription-based service was available, and it was. So they moved over to that cloud-based line of business app, and cut out all the nonsense. They also then lastly took all of their important files that were remaining on their computers, put them on a cloud backup as well. Now the cloud service results in peace of mind. The higher availability, the speed, the way in which the software is architected to work in a remote environment, it meant that it was more streamlined to their operations. So there was this kind of silver lining to making these changes, and not only that were they prepared for the next power outage, for the next issue that could come up with the environment, the next water leak, but it also helped them be more efficient. So good stuff. Next one is Lemery Tuxedos. They are a local retailer, and they're Hawaii's foremost source for men's formal wear. I'm not their spokesperson, but I believe in what they're doing. They help the community and also in another very well-needed way. They also had power outages and internet issues, and they had a central server that would keep all this information about tuxedos and the clients and the measurements, all that in one place. And so in addition to this frequent outages of power and internet, they had endless email problems with their GoDaddy email service provider. Emails were getting lost. They were being stored on the workstations. As the workstations would die, those emails would disappear. It was kind of a problem. So we virtualized their existing tuxedo rental software. We moved it to an off-site data center, which is not affected by power and internet issues. Moved them to a cloud backup, so their files were now saved. And we also switched them over to Google Apps. That took all their email, their contacts, and the calendar and put it all into the cloud, and made it so that they could share the calendar. Emails were no longer getting lost. Everything was out of the office, and it made them more efficient as, of course, the silver lining that I mentioned earlier. So we had improved speed, so the faster customer processing time. What that meant is that in their retail stores, the customers could be processed quicker for their tuxedo rentals. The cloud apps meant that they synchronized their data to mobile devices. The cloud backup meant that they didn't have to worry about missing data, and they could sleep at night. At the end of the day, that's what we're looking for, is peace of mind. Now, of course, the next step is, what do you do? Think about cost versus worth. Question I have for you is, what does it cost to be prepared? Answer, of course, is what will it cost you not to be prepared? Aldo Gucci, the founder of the famous brand, said, "The bitterness of poor quality is remembered long after. The sweetness of low price is faded from memory." The more your business prepares, the more resilient it will be in the face of disaster. As promised, we're going to go through a 12-point disaster recovery checklist, and I know that we're running kind of short on time. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, and of course, at the end of the presentation, you can go and download this information yourself and start working on it with your staff. Before you attack the checklist, however, there's 5 types of disasters you should know about. First is geological. Earthquakes, tsunamis, volcanic eruptions. That's something that, of course, we here in Hawaii have no experience with, right? Wrong. Meteorological hazards. This is floods, tidal surges, droughts, fires. Lightning strikes, something that we don't really see a lot of here, but it sure happens a lot in the Caribbean and in other parts of the world. Tornadoes, not unless you're out on certain parts of the island, you're not going to see that. Biological hazards. If something happens where, of course, we have a lot of planes coming in and out of Hawaii, if someone were to bring bird flu, anthrax, or West Nile virus, something like that, how would that affect your business? Human-caused events, this is accidental, and of course, accounts for roughly 40% of the outages that we encounter. Everything from utility outage to a water leak, or economic depression. These kind of things all can affect your business. And of course, number 5 is intentional. While you may have terrorists on your mind, another terrorist you might want to think about is a disgruntled employee. For some reason, they come back sometimes to damage the business. But there's a whole list here that you can look through. Now, in our 12-point disaster recovery checklist, first thing you want to do is define mission-critical company functions and figure out a hierarchy of operational importance. So list what you need to operate and figure out who's going to do it and how. Second thing, list mission-critical personnel and their job functions. So now you figured out what's needed to be done. Second item is figure out who's going to do it. And in a crisis, you may not have everyone available. Some people can get stuck at home. Some people can be stranded. Some people can be washed out to sea. What do you do? I don't know. You're going to have to come up with the answer. Item number 3 on our 12-point disaster recovery checklist is list the equipment needs of critical personnel. What do they need to do their job? You may find out that it's not computers that they need, but they need tools. So discovering which tools they are, where they're available, make sure that they have them available, give it all to them. Number 4, determine a site relocation for a contingency. Banks do this. They have an off-site location that they can continue to operate, and it has food, shelter, water, computers, offices, desks, everything that they need in order to continue operations. Ask your bank. You may be surprised at the answer they give you. So, do you? Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be an off-site office, in a penthouse. It can be at the boss's house where he's got a home office that can be repurposed to run the business in the event of a disaster. It can be at one of the remote offices. If you have multiple sites, then you can designate one as being the backup or primary site. Number 5 on our 12-point disaster recovery checklist is to look at what needs to be done. So this is an event task list. So it's a chronological task list. First we do this, then we do this, then we do this, and then we're back in business. So once you create that list, you assign a responsibility to an individual in that organization. Of course, if you looked at item number 2, you would have those individuals already listed out, what they need, and a contingency or backup individual to cover them if something were to happen to the primary individual. Item number 6 is to document your current computer data backup methods and frequencies. I can't stress enough how much you need your data day to day. You may not think you do, but try turning off your computers for 20 minutes. See how long your business can function. It's pretty hard. So having all your data backed up and documenting all that, because when everything is going wrong in the event of a disaster, being able to flip open a folder, look at where your backup is, and know how to get it back, know how long it's going to take you to get it back, is really, really important. Document. Number 7, identify hard copy documents. Remember we were talking earlier about having your documents someplace, maybe your insurance documents. If you have a fire, office burns down, you don't have your insurance documents, it's kind of hard to figure out who you need to call and how much you're covered for. Are you underinsured? Are you overinsured? Talk to your insurance agent. I'm not an insurance agent, I'm not an insurance expert, but I've been told by my insurance agent that companies can go out of business if they're underinsured and disaster strikes. So look it up. There are some important documents on paper. List them out, put them aside. Fireproof safe may help you, but remember, fireproof safes are only designed to last a certain amount of time under fire. It's best to take it off-site or find some other way to store it. Number 8 on our 12-point disaster recovery checklist is to really look at mission-critical items. These are things that you need to have in order to operate. Mission-critical means non-replaceable. If you're a services company, that usually means that you have some key people. Can anyone else do their job? And this is where we get into a first aid kit. So a first aid kit is something where you put together all the items that we've talked about so far. Important documents, your list of employees, who does what, contingency plans, and then put that into a briefcase or a fireproof safe or a folder or something where you can then refer to it later when problems happen. One thing you may know about first aid kits that maybe you don't do is there's stuff inside of first aid kits that expire. If you have old insurance or you switch insurance companies, you should probably put that in your first aid kit, update it. If you buy new equipment, probably should put that in your first aid kit. If you get a new backup, at least include where that new backup goes. If you bring in a new services company or a new vendor, put that in your first aid kit. Pretty important stuff. Number 9 is to form a committee. Now, one of the things I find really hilarious is that often a C-level executive will come in and say, this is what we need to do to survive, go ahead and execute. But really the employees who are doing the day-to-day job probably know best what they need in order to fulfill their duties. Why not ask them? Of course, everyone loves to create a party planning committee. Why not form a disaster recovery committee? Give them specific crisis functions. Let them come up with a good action plan based on these 12 points. Why not? Item number 10 on our list is to create a crisis management media kit. Depending on your organization, you may be asked by the news what you're going to do to protect your customers' data, especially if there's a data breach, what you're going to do to continue operations in the event of a natural disaster. These things are important, and you don't want to have to try to come up with media, press releases, and emails and company memos for employees when things like this happen because you're dealing with keeping the business afloat. Put this together ahead of time. You can put it in your first aid kit, store it off-site, and you'll be fine. Think about that. This applies to a good percentage of companies probably listening today, but maybe not everyone, but it's important to put on there. Number 11 is to create a systematic schedule for updating the plan. What's that mean? That means just like any first aid kit, you got to go in there every once in a while, throw out the expired Tylenol. You got to go in there every once in a while and get new Band-Aids. You got to put new stuff in there. So an outdated plan is worthless. The disaster recovery plan should be reviewed and updated semi-annually. Semi-annually means every 6 months. Doesn't mean once a year. Doesn't mean every 3 years or whenever the mood strikes you. So what I like to recommend for this is tax time. So after taxes have been completed, go in there and update your list. Second time I like to do this is during the right after Thanksgiving. Easy to remember, right? You're done paying your taxes and you're done eating your fill. Those are the 2 times to jump in there, update your disaster recovery checklist. It also prepares you if anything happens during the holiday season, because for some reason during wintertime, during the holidays, when everyone's stressed out, that's when things tend to fall apart and we get the busiest. So those 2 times, after tax time, after Thanksgiving. Of course, the last step is you do need to measure and evaluate. That means you have to go in there and test it. Make sure that your plan works. Figure out how long it's going to take you to really get your business back online based on the scenarios we discussed earlier. And my clients really get tired of hearing me talk about this, but you do need to measure and evaluate. If it takes you a week to get your business back up and running in the event of a disaster, that's probably not a good thing. You might want to think about how to reduce that time. Create an evaluation checklist. Ask yourself how you did. You can stage mock disasters and figure out how your employees did. How did they respond when things went wrong? It's a good thing. Now, I gave you an outline of what you need to be aware of. But really, it's only the beginning of a bigger conversation. There's a lot more questions and planning you need to think about here. So there's not one right answer or one-size-fits-all solution, because what is needed to be implemented depends on your tolerance for risk, what kind of data you're handling. For example, healthcare and financial data are more at risk, and companies handling credit cards also have their own set of challenges. And I'm happy to get you those answers, or at least help you get them, by offering you a free consultation with me. And I'm really there to help you get clarity on the answers to these questions and figure out where you're losing money and how we can help. So typically in a disaster prep session, what we do is we figure out where you are today. What's your plan today? Where are you at? You need some sort of baseline from which you can improve. Second thing we figure out is where you'd like to be. Clarify specific business objectives, what you'd like to be able to accomplish from a business continuity perspective. Again, this is going to be different based on each individual company. And figure out really your threshold for acceptable loss. That, of course, we'd like to say none, but sometimes there's going to be some financial loss. This is where CFO is often there in a conversation like this. There's a financial loss because customers are affected by the same outages that you are. So, and then, of course, step number 3 is you figure out how are you going to get there, bridge the gap. Figure out how to get from where you are to where you want to be. Think about providing an action plan. We can figure out different technologies that can apply to this plan that we've set forward for you. Figure out your budget, your goals, and really the key thing you should be looking at is overall business continuity plan, or BC plan. Think about how we can use the cloud to keep your operation running in the event of natural man-made disasters, and keep you going. But really, I'd like to offer this to everyone, but the reality is there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much time, so I can only extend this to 8 people. And I want you to know there's no heavy sales pressure or any of that kind of stuff. I'm really doing this to try to help benefit the community. I feel that as being on one of the most isolated landmasses on Earth, we should be perhaps a little bit more prepared than everyone else, don't you? Now, of course, I cannot take on everyone, so it is an application process. I'll give you that website in a moment. And I want to make sure I actually can help you before we do a consultation. So what to do now? Next step is to go to this following website, www.soshawaii.com/beprepared. And we're going to take the first 8 on a first-come, first-served basis for the free consultation. Sorry, no exceptions. And the cat should be your indicator that this is a very cool thing. Go ahead, go there. You can fill in the form. You can download this presentation as well as a 12-point checklist. You can print it out and start going through it with your staff today and start getting prepared. At this point, I'm also going to open this up for questions. We do have a few minutes left. And let's check the question queue here. All right, well, we have a question here from Angela. Okay, it's fairly long. Let's see. So she's running a doctor's office, and she has patient records. She wants to use cloud backup, and what do I recommend? Well, one thing about patient records, and there's a good chance, Angela, that you've probably scanned these records, and they're in PDF format. There's something called HIPAA compliance. That's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. And there are some cloud-based HIPAA-compliant vendors, and what that means is it allows you to store your files there safely, and you can use one of those vendors. However, it can get rather expensive, so just be aware that there's a pretty high cost included with highly secure cloud-based storage. So what I might also recommend is a plan B if you don't want to incur that pretty hefty cost. If you do have more than one office, you can take those files and synchronize them from one office to the next. Of course, the question is, if we get a big tidal wave and both those offices are wiped out, you're going to have bigger problems on your hands. But at least you can maintain HIPAA compliance, keep those files from one office to the next, and you can continue to operate and save yourself some money. So I think that's about it. All right, are there any other questions? You can go ahead and type them into the chat window. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it over here to Ronalyn. And Ronalyn, take it away. Thank you, everyone, for having me. My name, again, is Attila Sares, SOS Tech Solutions. Thank you, Ronalyn.
Okay, thank you, Tila, for your time and for covering very important information. Mahalo to all of you who participated, and we're glad you joined us today. Feel free to get in touch with us at any time. Our contact information is on your screen. Thank you again, and aloha.